Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the new year, and a very happy and very healthy new year to all of you as well. Thank you for coming tonight. We've been joined, or will perhaps be joined later, by the following officers and executive members. That's Will for the Kpis, who's nearly always with us, Rhian Hayes, Grant Thornton, Andrew Cummings, Gregor Murray, Fran Hobson, Laura Buck, Wayne and Parry as executive members, and that should cover all of the items, I think. Are there any apologies for absence other than Rochelle, whom I already know about?
Yes, Paul Fishwick and Lindsay Ferris is here as a substitute.
Thank you very much, and welcome very much indeed, Lindsay. Thank you for coming. Minutes of the previous meeting. Can I ask for these as a correct record of what happened last time? Sarah, I think you've already notified me you want to say something, and also Jim afterwards. Sarah?
Thanks, Pauline. It was under the anti-poverty strategy section, and there was no mention of the challenge made about the co-production aspect. So I've suggested some wording, which I've obviously emailed over to you already, but just for the benefits of everyone else, I've suggested that we include, in relation to the co-production of the strategy, it was highlighted that not all BCS partners feel like they're properly engaged and have a seat at the table to write and develop this strategy. And it was confirmed that this would be happening going forward, and all members of the BCS will be present at subsequent scrutiny meetings where this is on the agenda.
Yes, I do remember we did agree that. And Jim?
Thank you. Under the unlawful encampments, one of the things that I asked for was, and the officers agreed to do, was an update on the national consultations. There were a number of consultations that were started and were still ongoing. Maybe they can come back to let us know what had happened to those.
You'd like that minuted?
Please.
Okay, given those two amendments, can I see those in favour of these minutes as a correct record of the last meeting? Those in favour, please. And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Am I echoing, by the way? Oh, just echoing up here. Thank you. Declarations of interest? I see none. And so public question time?
None received.
None received. And I have one member question from Gary Cowan. Gary, over to you.
Thank you, Pauline. On carbon savings, the report states over the last year, Woking Borough Council has worked in setting the ground to deliver projects that will increase the generation of renewable energy across the borough. It also states, my journey completed summer and winter competitions in primary schools and currently running a film competition for secondary school students, but goes on to say that there are no new actions for this section. My question is then, why did the council create a situation where children who live in Arborfield Green, including those living directly opposite the school gates, were not allowed to go to school there, and they all have had to be driven to other primary schools miles away from where they live? How will this help with achieving carbon saving? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. I have a fairly long and detailed answer, I'm afraid. At a strategic level, our planning for the borough's strategic development locations, or SDLs, has been underpinned by principles of creating sustainable communities that can sustain local access to services and amenities whilst minimising the need to travel. This is also underpinned by sustainable transport options both within and between SDLs and with existing main towns. Ensuring primary school provision to meet future anticipated need within these new communities has always been a key priority. And although predating our climate emergency, fully in line with the principles of sustainable development by reducing the need to travel and minimising carbon impact. Of course, in detail, at any one point in time, changing the overall pattern of primary provision and seeking to balance demand versus school places available across the system will never be an exact science, and there will always be some anomalies. It's anticipated that these will reduce over time as these new communities mature. With regard to Arborfield Green, the new school premises could not open as a new school in 2021 as there was insufficient local need to ensure that all local schools, including potentially both the Farley Hill Primary School and the Coombs Church of England Primary School in the Arborfield ward, could remain financially sustainable. In theory, relocating the Farley Hill Primary School would enable significant numbers of children from the former Arborfield Garrison, Arborfield Green and Finchwood Park areas to benefit from a school they could walk to at the earliest opportunity. It also addressed the long-standing issue of some undersized classrooms in the original Farley Hill School building. There's never been any intention that the new school would accommodate all the children living in the garrison. In all, 90 garrison children were admitted to Wokingham primary schools in 2021. Accommodating them all in one school would have effectively wiped out the intake to a number of schools. In more detail, the decision to build the new school was taken before the pandemic, when experience in Shinfield showed that new housing could lead to rapidly rising rolls, and the intention was indeed to avoid children having to be driven to school. It became apparent in 2020 that demand was unlikely to increase to a level to make a new school viable as a standalone school. Or if it had been filled and made viable, the significant fall in rolls of other schools would have threatened their viability. A significant contributor to this lack of demand was the cessation of house building in the early part of the pandemic. Therefore, the decision was taken to relocate Farley Hill School with a phased expansion from the current 30 places a year through 60 to 90, in line with the expected growth in the number of families in the area currently served by Farley Hill and the Coombs. So although the plan is to expand the school to 60 places from 2022, there is no expectation that all garrison families might be accommodated, and that's clear from the November 2021 report to executive. And there was no expectation that this would be the case for 2021. Indeed, the January 2020 executive paper was clear that the expansion above 30 places hinged on the impact on the Coombs. Incidentally, Gary, I share your concern as to head teachers, but as a former executive member for Children's Services and a former deputy head, I am well aware that without a minimum number of children, no school can be financed and therefore can't function. You may be interested to know that the newly formed Education Partnership, which includes 10 head teachers and the Director of Children's Services, is going to be discussing school places at its first meeting at the end of January. So sorry about the detailed answer, but that's the information that exists at the moment. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, and thank you very much, Pauline. That is actually very helpful. But the point really is, had the developer submitted a plan to build 2,000 houses on Arborfield Garrison and stated that he was not going to provide a primary school for the occupants of those 2,000 houses, the council quite rightly would have refused that planning permission. So it's very clear that the purpose of building that school was to accommodate the children on the garrison for obvious reasons. The developer marking those houses achieved sales because they offered a school on site that children could walk or cycle to the school. And this is all very green and is actually laudable. My question is, how can the council justify what you just said, and how well does it bode for future large-scale development when history shows that the council cannot be trusted to deliver on the promises they've made, particularly on this site? Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. I think the essence of the answer was hidden in my first answer, but I will pick out that little bit. The a school can only be viable if it's got sufficient numbers of children. Otherwise, it doesn't attract the finances. And if you put all the children into one school in an area, that has an impact on surrounding schools, which of course we don't want to undermine. As for climate emergency, everything is a balance. And yes, we are committed to it. But at the same time, we're committed to keeping our existing schools open. Nothing is as straightforward as we would like it to be, unfortunately. But that is the fact that we are aiming to support all of our primary schools, not just lose one at the expense of another. That is the answer. You may not like it, but that is the fact. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline.
Right, then let's move on to the next agenda item, which is the Q2 KPIs. In fact, this summer's KPIs. Is this a point of order, Jim?
It's a point of clarification for me. Are we allowed to input to those questions?
No,
No. Okay, thank you.
not unless you ask a new question at the next meeting.
I'll do that.
Okay. Yes, last summer's KPIs, but I won't comment on that any further because I've done that plenty enough. There's a very long report here in our papers. Will, do you want to just run us briefly through any changes that have been made since the last time to the layout and the data included?
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Madam Chairman. So we have just tweaked the report slightly in terms of including the members of the executive for whom the KPIs represent. So that's clear within the report. And beyond that, there aren't any significant changes. I would just like to apologise again for the timeliness of this report and assure everybody that the work that we discussed last time when we brought this report along with a presentation about how we were going to improve it, that has started. In fact, we had several workshops today, and we've got a lot going on through this through the next coming weeks, and we're really hopeful and working very hard to bring an improved report, as we said, for Q1 of the next municipal year. So a lot of work going on in the background to improve the timeliness of this report, which we discussed previously. The report itself, the summary of the main report, I think expresses the general gist of performance. Continued strong performance with 32 KPIs, that's 70% hitting targets. A lot of additional successes which aren't necessarily drawn out in the KPIs, and probably the most prominent of that is children's services being accepted onto the UNICEF Child Friendly Cities and Communities programme, which starts this calendar year. There are a couple of red KPIs that have emerged. So 3 of those are from adults and social care. They're 3 targets that are set against deliberately challenging and stretching targets and performance has obviously been impacted to some extent by COVID. And when we look at national benchmarking, we continue to sit in the top 3 authorities in the South East. So whilst we are slipped a little bit against challenging targets, in terms of a benchmarking position, we continue to perform reasonably well. The other 2 red KPIs are around our leisure. And again, those are challenging targets because they reflect an aspiration to return to pre-COVID levels of participation. And some of the participation, particularly the targeted activity on the second KPI, that's targeted at some of our older residents. And there is a little bit of resistance and understandably to re-engage in public activity, but work continues to push that, and it's hopeful that we'll return to those pre-COVID levels in due course. That's it in summary. I'm sure people have questions. I'll do my best to answer them.
Thank you very much, Will. Questions or comments? Sarah, Rachel, Norman, and then Guy. And then Jim.
Thank you. Are we going through this page by page like normal, or should we just?
I think we'll just pick out whatever you want to bring up. Otherwise, we'll be here all night.
Okay, I've got some questions and some comments. I firstly wanted to very quickly pick up on something on page 22, which is the challenges under the children's services, which was the recruitment of qualified educational psychologists is creating a capacity issue impacting on EHCP assessment performance. And I'm just wondering if that's maybe something that Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny might want to look at possibly. That's your committee, isn't it, Norman?
Norman, do you want to respond to that?
Sorry, just repeat what it was you were asking.
It was on page 22, which is the overview of the children's services one. And one of the challenges, it said, is the recruitment of qualified educational psychologists is creating a capacity issue impacting on EHCP assessment performance. And given all the issues that we've had in the centre, it's, you know, been making massive improvements, but always been an underperforming team. And I'm just wondering if this is something that should be looked at by your scrutiny committee. Possibly.
Yeah, it's certainly something we can consider as part of the forward programme at the next meeting. Can sort of see about how it might fit in, see if it will fit into one of the subjects that we're already looking at, for example.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Right, so I've got a few. There's one in particular I wanted to pick up on, and this is something I've asked before. So,
Sarah, can you give us the page numbers, please?
okay, so if we look at page 41 then to begin with. And this is around a bit more of the detail on the children's services KPIs. And this is in relation to children who are NEET. So in the Q4 monitoring report from last time, I picked up on the fact that we had a KPI that was the percentage of care leavers who are NEET. And the query I picked up was that in order to be green, 52% of our care leavers needed to be in education, employment or training. And I picked up on the fact that that's an appallingly low target. The next meeting that we had, the KPI had changed as it is here, where it's the percentage of all 16 to 17-year-olds who are NEET. And obviously the way we're monitoring this is on national. So we went from 52% being in education, employment and training. We're now looking at something like 97%. I got a written response to this, which concerned me that the Directorate have been asked to identify 6 KPIs to report on. And the KPI that I was originally talking about has been archived. We haven't asked for that. Who's made that decision that we shouldn't see that information? Because quite honestly, if we're expecting all of our children of that age, young people of that age, you know, to be in education, employment and training, we're asking for 97%, but we're only expecting 52% of our care leavers, yet we're supposed to, as corporate parents, you know, expect the same of our care leavers as we do of those that aren't. I think it's a really important KPI. So my question is, why has that been archived? Why have we as a committee not had any input into that? Because it's a really important one. I mean, I'd like to know what's actually going on there, please.
I think Steve Moore's got an answer to that, and then I'll come to you if you wanted to add anything.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Sarah. I'm not quite sure I've got an answer to that specific one, but what I can tell you in general, because I spoke to our new interim Director of Children's Services today, Helen Watson, and Helen's more than happy to pick up any questions you have in relation to the PIs through the Children's Scrutiny Committee. So to just say that, so Sarah, I know you alluded to the fact that you would forward those questions on, but I think a liaison with Helen will help that. She's more than happy to pick up any questions you've got there at that forum on that point. In relation to PI setting, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of PIs, as Will knows, to his great efforts. I know that, and it's not what just you see here. There are local PIs that are dealt with by the service and so on. So there's always a challenge in relation to what corporate PIs should be put on the suites that we put in front of you, and there will always be difference of opinions, and I appreciate that. And I'm not trying to do down in any way, shape or form of what Sarah said in relation to NEETs and care leavers and targets, but just more to talk to you about the process. So even in place and growth, we're going through the process at the moment as well. of suggesting the critical PIs, the business critical PIs that we want to put in front of you every year. And the way that process works is it's obviously suggested by myself as director, through assistant directors and with the executive members. And then that suite of PIs then comes forward for some sort of agreement if they are going to be the corporate PIs that we're going to monitor throughout the following year. So I just thought from a process perspective, just to pick up Sarah's point, it would help to clarify who gets involved in that process and how we sort of put those proposals forward. Will, if I can, Madam Chairman, just ask Will maybe to expand a little bit more on that process if I've missed anything out, Will.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Steve. So the process as it stands is that KPIs against the corporate delivery plan are agreed by executive members. So it's the executive that approve the KPIs that are put forward by the directors, as Steve said. So that's the process that is gone through every year. Every time we refresh these KPIs, they're put forward by ADs and directors, and then ultimately approved by the executive.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll write to the head of children's services and the exec member about this. I just think maybe going forward, given that we are reviewing these KPIs and having input into them, maybe when that process of review as to what the KPIs should be for the next year, it should be something that this committee should consider.
Did you receive a reply to your email, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I got the reply and I'm querying that because it doesn't sit well at all. The fact that what's basically happened is I've highlighted something that I think is quite serious, and instead of actually dealing with it, it's just been removed as a KPI.
Removed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite shocking when we're talking about care leavers here.
Madam
Do you
Chairman,
have any comments on that?
sorry, Madam Chairman, can I just come back on what Sarah said, just to give Sarah?
Yes, of course, Steve. Yeah.
Thank you. Just to give Sarah some reassurance. These PIs are not removed from monitoring. They are totally still in existence within the service, and they're business critical to the service as well. It's just how many we put forward for the suite of scrutiny and appraisal. And I'm sure if we put forward others, then there's others that we could argue should be on there as well. So it's always a difficult balance there, and I fully appreciate that. And please make that case to Helen and to the lead member. But I can give you assurance that this PI will still be monitored and tracked, but it will be locally monitored and tracked.
Okay, thank you. Could I ask one more before someone else goes? Is that okay?
Yes, but I just wonder whether
Okay.
Norman had any comment on that question.
Thanks.
I don't think so. In addition to what the officers have said, we did ask at the children's services meeting yesterday evening for the KPIs and performance to be brought forward to the next meeting of children's services. So we just need to keep that one in mind.
Yeah, and perhaps ask that is included with the children's services one. Thank you, Sarah, for raising that. Your other question then.
Thank you. I just also wanted to point out on page 54, RA8, which is capital budget monitoring forecast position. It's been marked as minus 3.69%, and given that the target is plus minus 1%, that means that should be in the red and not a green.
Page 54, Will?
Yeah, we'll look at that and amend it. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Rachel?
Thank you. Yeah, I just had a question about the format of the report, actually, and how the top wins are picked out and how they're selected in the summaries for each section. So if you look at page 20, for example, we've got there the top 3 wins. Now, two of those 3 wins, I can't see that they're actually directly related to the KPIs. So we're mentioning, for example, climate change and the activity that's taken place, but obviously that only makes a difference if carbon is saved at the end of it, which is obviously the main measurement around that. So just to say something's been done with no sort of measure of the impact doesn't really, I don't think, help us to scrutinise how effective the council is by using KPIs. And that's mirrored through the report, obviously with, things being listed and activities being listed, things like press appearances, particularly on the climate, I have to say. So the question is, why are we doing it? Why are we sort of showcasing activity in a KPI report without any sort of backup of impact or measurements behind it?
Activity rather than impact. Okay, good point. Will?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you. It's a really good question. And I think the answer is that KPIs can only paint a certain element of the story. And this gives an opportunity to talk about some of the things that don't directly impact this set of KPIs, and allows us to celebrate as well as flag some of the work that's been going on that won't have an immediate impact on those KPIs, as well as identify, of course, through the challenges and opportunities, any challenges and opportunities that may come along into the future. So it's just an opportunity for directors to give and executive members to give some balance to the KPIs with a bit of context. And I know Steve's put his hand up as well.
Thanks, Will. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to reiterate what Will said, it's not a perfect science, and if our commentary was purely to stay on the KPI performance, which of course we could do, we would probably miss the opportunity of sharing more wider information in relation to concerns around performance. And actually, that's the key bit for me. Whenever I look at these sheets, my eye is drawn to the challenges, actually, than it is the successes, because the challenges tell me where I need to focus my thinking, and it might not necessarily be that I've got a PI for that, but they're the things I'm bringing to the fore, if you like, as a director, and saying, look, everybody, these are the big risks or ticket items that are coming forward that we need to keep a real close eye on. For example, I think in P&G, place and growth, we were talking about a lack of drivers. We had, back in the summer, and we don't have a PI for that. But to me, it was business critical. It was obviously COVID related and economically related, but that had a significant risk in being able for us to deliver our services. And we're seeing some of those pressures already now, aren't we, through some of the self-isolation that's going on the current pandemic. So I suppose it's a good question that's raised. My preference would be to give you more meaningful, timely information about what is happening and what's in my mind and what I want to bring to your attention, rather than being restricted on just the PIs that was set maybe a few months earlier, if that's helpful as a comment.
Thank you very much. Norman.
Okay, thank you. Maybe just following up what Rachel has said, the adult social care and health sort of summary, the opportunities do refer to the KPIs there. Maybe if there's comments, but maybe they should, the wins and the opportunities refer to the relevant KPIs, just so that there is a bit of cross there. That would perhaps cover partly what Rachel was saying. So I have 2 or 3 questions. They're really questions of detail, I think, on some of the KPIs. The first one was on AS7, the proportion of people. This is on page, I read it, 38. The proportion of people receiving long-term care who were subject to review in the last 12 months. The performance seems to be pretty well consistent, but it's always just below target. I wonder why it's just below target, why it bubbles along at the same rate. Is there a sort of rationale behind that? And if so, why is the target where it is? Please. It's the first question. I'll come back on the others if I may.
Thank you. Will?
So I think for a really detailed answer, we need to take that back to the service. But I know that from the summary that I talked about, that some of these targets in ASC and AS7 is one of them, that the target's been stretched deliberately, to be deliberately stretching in order to now drive an improvement in that performance. And that could be the reason, but I think it's worth taking that away to the service and asking a more direct question, unless Steve has something else to add.
I don't have the specific answer to that one, but I think the point you just raised is a really good question for scrutiny. I've worked for many local authorities, and there's nothing easier than sitting a load of nice little neat targets that you're going to show nice little fluorescent little greens flagging all day long. That serves no purpose or value. What Matt has done admirably, I think, within adult social care, because I've had these conversations with him, is he's pushed himself and the service well beyond what would be expected of being statutory compliant and ticking a box. He's pushed himself because he wants to be top quartile. He wants the service to be exceptional, and the targets have been stretched accordingly. So because something is red doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. And it's something I say in many places I've worked at. It begs the question, quite rightly, because it's there to flag. And I think the explanation in relation to the way that we're stretching ourselves in that area is a good explanation. So he's not resting on his laurels. He's pushing the service. He's stretching it as best he can to make sure it's excellent out there and just not fair. So I think that's a rationale. And I think it's something from a CLT point of view we're discussing as well. Do we really want to be stretching ourselves a lot further and pushing ourselves a lot further and running the risk, actually, of course, of having more reds and ambers? But at the same time, if that is a direct result that improves our services for our residents and our communities, well, surely that's a good thing that we need to do going forward. So I'm certainly an advocate of not seeing reds as bad, is red seeing, can you please tell me what's going on there? So it may be more of a cultural thing I think we need to address internally to be able to progress ourselves forward.
Thank you. I know Children's Services used to set very high targets to encourage staff to reach them, even when they were perhaps not possible to be reached. Thank you for that explanation. Norman, back to you.
Great, thank you very much for that. The second one's, I guess, a bit of detail too. It's on PG 21, which is on page 51 and also on page 61. It's the rate percentage of waste recycled from the curbside. I mean, that seems to be now largely appearing above our target, which is clearly very good news indeed. I just wonder, again, do we know why that is and how sustainable that is? For example, is it partly due to the introduction of food waste collection and/or the amount of cardboard that's probably now being delivered with all the deliveries coming to people's doors? Clearly, it's a number that we need to drive up. You know, there's still a large amount of waste, general waste, that could be recycled. And I noted elsewhere in this report about the targeting of areas of the borough that are not recycling, especially food waste, as much as others. You see it when you drive around on a collection morning. Some parts of the borough I think are very good, and others less so. I just wonder if there's a general sort of comment on why that percentage of waste recycled is now increased significantly. Thanks.
Thank you. Will?
Madam Chairman, would you like me to comment on that one?
Either of you.
Yeah, that's fine. So thank you, Councillor. I think that's a really good question. I think a lot has to be to do with changing behaviour and cardboard and home deliveries and those sort of things. There's certainly more recyclable waste being generated. I also would like to place plaudits on the service. I think they've done a lot over last year of really pushing the recycling agenda and getting people participating. And we need to do a lot more as well. There's the emerging waste strategy coming forward as well, which you'll see over the next few months as that starts to talk about how we need to engage our communities to participate more than they are at the moment. And you're spot on, actually. One of the big areas of focus is food waste participation, because food waste participation can certainly increase and it has massive environmental benefits and also financial benefits. So that is a key area of focus. One final thing I would say is under the waste hierarchy, it's important to constantly remind ourselves that recycling, although it's a very good thing, is a mid-table thing. It's not the holy grail in any way, shape or form. It's the better of landfilling and the better of wasting, but it sits mid-table. Above recycling becomes sits reuse. So we should reuse before we recycle. And then at the top of the tree, and this is always the key one, and you will see this will be a key KPI for P&G next year is reduce, because although we're very good at recycling, we are not very good at reducing the waste that we generate. So we actually generate an awful lot more waste per household, even if it is recyclable, than happens in many other areas. So all waste is bad. Recycling is less bad in my language, but what we need to do is get people to not create it in the first place, and that's really difficult. But that needs to be our energy and what we focus on through the waste strategy over the next year or so. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Steve. In fact, I have seen those words used as a slogan, reduce, reuse, recycle in other authorities. I wonder whether we could plug that a little bit more here in Wokingham, particularly the reuse, because people are so good at just throwing things away.
Agreed.
Okay, Norman, was that all?
No, there was one more, and
Okay.
just perhaps a comment on that too. I think the household waste recycling centres have a very good record in terms of reuse and recycling. It's how we take that as opposed to the curbside. Perhaps it's a challenge without sending 20 trucks around every week. It's quite a balance. There was one last one, which was RA2 on page 59, which is the occupancy rate of WBC owned regeneration units. There seemed to be a sort of slightly mixed messages, I think, in this report, where it's green, but it's not quite as good as we hoped it would be. Is there any sort of concern there? The units in Elmsfield, for example, getting those let?
No, so we discussed this in the Resource and Assets Leadership Team when we were reviewing their results, and the view is that it's amber now, but the expectation is it should return to green in the coming reports. So it was a question of a few deals waiting to be signed, which perhaps weren't signed at the time. But the hope is absolutely that it will return to green and back to target in the coming months.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Guy.
Thank you, Chair. One quick question, and I know it's been mentioned a couple of times, but it's around AS1, because within the documentation, it's always referring to about shortages of staff, etc. Now, I know this is not a nationally monitored one, and it was commented that we're still doing better than the area. But my concern is regarding the lack of staff. And I note that this is not necessarily one that's been highlighted as a COVID risk, as it were, in the rankings as opposed to AS3 below it. Has the pandemic actually impacted on the recruitment, and are we in a better position now than we were in the end of the spring, beginning of the summer last year? I just want to know that, because if we've still got a staffing problem, then this is not going to improve, which means we then need to look at whether this KPI is achievable, as it were.
Will or Steve?
I'm happy to pick that one up, Madam Chairman, and thanks for the question. Funny enough, we had a conversation today at CLT about this, and I know Matt is working on a recruitment and retention strategy for adult social care. So he's well aware of some of the challenges of recruitment and retention, and he has that workforce plan coming through as we speak. So it is something that's being addressed, because we do obviously understand it is a risk, and if we don't do something from a recruitment retention point of view, it's going to continue to be a challenge. So we are addressing it proactively.
Guy?
Thank you. Just to come back on that then, very pleased to hear that it's been taken up from the CLT point of view. But what wasn't answered in the question is the fact that this is required. All aspects should be having on this. But does this mean that we need to be potentially, as this committee, watching this one a little more closely going forward, especially considering we've been in, we are currently in winter, as it were, and we all know what winter's like when trying to get people's appointments, etc.
Yeah, I think there's no answer to that, but yes.
Yeah, it's very difficult. There's, I mean, it's very difficult to predict, I suppose, when we come out of the pandemic about where everything's going to land and what's going to happen to the economy and jobs and employment, and whether people are going to change their careers or whatever they're going to do. So we're watching it very, very carefully. There's always been challenges, I think, within the social care sector to recruit and retain. I think that's now recognised, and it's not a Wokingham issue. That I think that's one that's challenging everywhere, and I know something that Matt pays an awful lot of attention to as a director of adults. So in the immediate issue, I know there are short-term plans that Matt's looking at to address that, and I think they are all on track. I think the bigger issue, Guy, is around the medium to longer term plan of what we do to make sure the sector is more sustainable going forward. He'll be way more qualified, as you know, to talk about this than me, and more than happy to take that back to him, Guy, to give you an answer on that, or back into Pauline as the chair. If that's okay.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much, Steve. That'd be useful. Thank you. Jim.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, thank you to you guys for producing this report. I know it's 1:45 and it's a little bit late, but I can understand the detail in here, plus working on new KPIs must be a bit of a challenge. So thank you very much for that. I come back to my mind needing to be refreshed, because we've discussed this before. To go through this amount of information and apply appropriate overview and scrutiny is difficult. I know we're looking at trying to split down so we could have either directorate or executive responsibilities here at a phased stage through the year, so we can actually understand the KPIs, the performance, the difficulties, the successes, etc. Is that still happening, or did we decide not to do that?
I think that is still happening, isn't it? Well, can you remind me?
This again, and Steve might be able to answer some of these questions, because this has been discussed at CLT about how this can best be handled. What we're hoping is that the timeliness and the speed with which the reporting produced when we have our new system in place will mean you'll be able to put in questions potentially before the meeting, so we can make sure we've got the right officers or members from the executive present to answer questions, and that is probably the best solution in my mind. But we don't quite know how the new reporting process is going to work, so we will continue to be a bit agile in our thoughts and work with CLT officers across the organisation and exec members to get representation that's appropriate whenever we can.
It's always going to be a balance, isn't it, between having too much and not enough, and different people will want different amounts. But I do have to say, and thank you, Will, for the work you've done on this, that this is incredibly clear compared with what we used to get. And even though it's very full-bodied, shall we say, it is very easy to follow. So thank you for that. But Jim, I don't know whether you've got any further suggestions you'd like to make?
Just to repeat that, I think we need to cut out some of the noise that's in here so we can focus on the important things. And just again, to reiterate, thank you to you guys for the work. This is definitely an improvement. Let's take on the next one.
Thank you. Sam.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, again, thank you for this very detailed report. Found it very, very, very useful. It's more of a positive comment, really. It was in regards to something on page 23, sorry. It mentions in top 3 wins, the housing team has achieved a reduction in the number of residents in B&B temporary accommodation. And I think I speak for all of us, and I think that's a really great thing to achieve, especially in a space where the demand is so high at the moment for these sort of services. I'll just be keen to see any of you guys are going to comment on this, and also how we're sort of doing in comparison to other areas on this.
Thank you. That is indeed good news.
I can pick that question up, Madam Chairman, if you wish. So yes, and thank you for those really good comments. The team in housing have worked very hard to reduce down the amount of people in temporary accommodation. For 2 weeks, temporary accommodation is not a good way to house people who are very vulnerable in their position at the time. and also it's the most expensive. For those of you who don't know, vastly more expensive to place someone in emergency accommodation or temporary accommodation. So we have upskilled some of the resources within the team and capacity. We've gone out and secured some long-term contract arrangements with some providers and been able to reduce down the amount of people in TA or temporary accommodation. And we will continue to do so. We are seeing increased presentation, of course, coming through the door. It is relatively very small compared to other local authorities, but there is an upward trend, obviously, of people presenting, and something we are keeping a very close eye on to make sure we are supporting the most needy within our communities. But thank you for your kind comments, and I will certainly feed them back to the Assistant Director and the services. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Sarah, you want to ask one more question?
Thank you. I wasn't sure if anyone else would pick up on a couple of these things. So I just wanted to ask firstly about page 50, and this is PG 13, which is the proportion of highways infrastructure schemes on track for delivery. In the last quarter, there were two parts, the South Wokingham Distributor Road, Spine Road and Western Gateway were both RAG rated as red, and this time they're green. But there's no information in this report or the previous one to explain what's actually going on here. So what would be useful is, I mean, we might not get the answer tonight, probably require a detailed answer. Can we be sent as a committee post this meeting information as to why they were red before, why they're green now, and actually how progress of these delivery schemes is measured so we can understand it better, please?
Is that something that we could answer now, or is it an email the best way?
We need some detail.
Yeah, I can't answer it now, but what I will do, Sarah, is I'll make sure you get the response you requested.
No, that's fine. And then the only other thing I just wanted to pick up, just a couple of things in some of the wins. Just a point on page 20, one of the wins there, which was the council's activity in response to the climate change emergency, was significant through Q2 with a wide range of activities, including the Dinton Activity Centre being showcased at COP26 and discussion at the Youth Council. COP26 happening in Q3, not Q2. So I'd be interested to know what significant wins there were actually, because that one isn't included in Q2. And the other one, very quickly, it's more a comment rather than a question. This is on page 24, which is placing growth. And one of the wins has been listed as completed retender and route optimisation of the home to school service. I would think there'll be a lot of families out there that would be up in arms with it being called a win, given what happened.
You want me to come back on that one, Sarah? So it was a hugely immense piece of work that was carried out by the team. It was a lot of work that was carried out, and I worked very closely with the staff at the latter ends of that project, and they were really at it 100%. Admittedly, there were some things that didn't go to plan, and there was lots of learning that came out of that process that you're aware of, and we've taken that on board going forward, and we'll ensure some of the challenges we face don't happen again. But I do thank the team for their efforts in what they were doing with that. But as you say, there's learning out of that that's been taken on board as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't put that in a top win, I'm afraid. Thank you.
If I could just sort of follow that up, Sarah. There was an hour-long discussion on this last night at Children's Services, and I think the scrutiny team was perfectly satisfied that lessons have been learnt, to use a horrible phrase, and that things will not happen that way again in future. And so from that respect, I think it is a win, because they solved the problem very quickly and they've got on board with what caused it and how to prevent it happening again. I would see that as a win. It wasn't a win to start with, but I think they have one through. That's my view. Anyway, any other comments? Other than one that I've got to mention, it's about fly tipping. Page 35 says the number of fly tipping incidents is worse, and page 61 says this year's target's been set to reduce the levels of fly tipping from last year's high levels by at least 10%. Now, in a sense, this is a bit of a rhetorical question, because I suspect there's nothing you can do about it. But is there any way that we as a council can put pressure on the government to increase the maximum fine Because at the moment, I think it's just £400, and that's hardly a disincentive to a hardened fly tipper. Is there anything we can do to increase that fine?
Madam Chairman, I can pick that up. It's an interesting topic. So £400 was a stretched FPN, or fixed penalty notice, that was given a few years ago, because it used to be a lot less than that, as you're aware of as well. So they did stretch it to £400, but it's your definition of fly tipping as well, because fly tipping is has to be clarified under one umbrella and one comment, and it's not. There's your domestic waste that comes out, which is what the FPNs are all about, really. Is people putting bags of rubbish out and not supposed to put them, or dumping things around bases of trees and those sort of things. But then fly tipping to other people is commercial fly tipping, when people are dumping £5,000 worth of asbestos in a country lane or a 12-wheeler lorry. What I would say in Wokingham, and it's Wokingham specific this, and having worked in many other places, I think we're very proactive. I think fly tipping incidents, we record them all, or certainly record an awful lot, and many councils don't. And I think that's important to remember that. So every local authority is required under law to report something through to DEFRA called fly capture, or used to be, and this has been updated, which basically lists all the fly tipping incidents over a period of time and what action and how many FPNs they've issued. So we should have that data. What I would say is, again, there's no statutory requirement for local authorities to enforce against this. So you will find some authorities that are more proactive than others. And I think that Wokingham is one of the most proactive, where you'll find some cities even actually, where on paper you'll find they've got less fly tips than what you've got in Wokingham. So it's not a true comparison, because they're not recording actually what they're finding. So it is a difficult indicator to address. And I think the best way to address what's going on with fly tipping is to get a feel for our local environment and actually see what is out there and what is going on, and then target that. Final thing I'd say on that is, you'll be aware we're proposing to bring a new antisocial behaviour team into play in April this year, when the dissolving of the PPP brings us about our own service, and that will focus quite heavily on environmental crime. So I'd hopefully see a further, even significant increase in our ability to be able to catch those responsible that blight our communities out there. Thank you.
Thank you. And last question from Jim.
Thank you. Just building on the fly tipping comment, I don't think it's the level of fines which is the deterrent. I think it's the fear of being caught. So I think there is potentially a KPI that we could use, which is to increase the number of prosecutions that we actually get to, because I know there's a huge amount of work and complexity in trying to get those that we believe are guilty to be prosecuted. And I think that's perhaps a more realistic target that we could perhaps look at.
Let's support that. Thank you very much, everybody. That's a very detailed discussion there. We're asked to agree the recommendation on page 15, which is to endorse the Council's Q2 performance monitoring report for the period of July to September. I see those in favour of endorsing it. That is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you again, Will, for all the work you're doing on this to clarify things for us. It's been great help. Shahid.
Thank you, Chair. Put the camera on as well. I've been listening to obviously the discussion on the performance indicators, and as you know, as a deputy chair, I've been working with Steve and Will and Sally and the team, how best to perhaps to address a couple of points which has been mentioned. So I just wanted, maybe in summary, I just would like to say a couple of things, if that's okay, Chair.
Yeah, of course.
One thing is that I think everybody's perhaps acknowledge that there's a lot of work has gone in and is still going on behind the scenes. As you can imagine, this information, this data is scattered in a number of systems where information is extracted and where obviously the numbers and the output which you see as it is. Now, obviously there are hundreds of KPIs. The challenge for the team is which one do they bring forward to the overview and scrutiny committee, which are meaningful to you? right? Which will make your, which is, makes your time much more effective. So you are measuring, you are looking at the right things. So it's measuring what really matters, and for the business point of view, and therefore, obviously, you can only bring certain number of KPIs which are really important, right? That's number one. That doesn't mean to say, and that other KPIs are not being monitored. Yes, they are. There are a lot of KPIs, but they may not be actually brought to the committee, right? But if the committee feels that there's a question which to be asked, then certainly please do ask the questions. But and officers can give the answers to that, right? Because it's a challenge. It's going to be. It doesn't matter what how many. If it's 5 or 10 or 20, I'm sure there'll be a question asked by the members. Say, look, what about here? What about why is this missing? Or why is that missing? Right. So how many? The question is all going to be how many do you include? In terms of principle, what we have tried to look at is, number one, what are the critical KPIs which really matter from the business point of view, which we must be measuring, which the committee must have a visibility of, and that's number one, the critical nature of this. Second principle is a timeliness, making sure that they are not so out of date so they become meaningless. So the timing factor that is being addressed, as well said, and hopefully as we move to the new financial year, that that will become more evident to the committee as well. Thirdly, also presenting it in a format which is easily digestible by the committee as well, right? So just so it has that is very important. So it is in presentation format, and that's why we've been trying to sort of play with certain formats, right? See which one we're getting a positive feedback on. Can this be tweaked further so it becomes easier for the committee to digest that information? And thirdly, lastly, I would like to say that they mentioned that officers are looking at the old KPIs. Asking critically whether the current KPIs we have, does that really help us to run the business effectively? Are they critical enough? If they're not, then perhaps we can monitor them, but they should be in terms of priority, they should be lower. But nevertheless, look at critical. If it's not meaningful, then they maybe drop them as well, right? Then have them agreed with the executive offer of each of the businesses. So as the directors, executives, my suggestion would be, and this is what I've been discussing with the officers as well, that once they've been agreed, then perhaps share the final list with the overview scrutiny committee, right? So we all know at the beginning of the year what KPI is going to be basically we're going to focus on for the rest of the year, right? I think that'd be otherwise we'll have this question coming up every meeting, why this is being measured and why that is not being measured. So that's why I was going to suggest that perhaps once that exercise is finished for the directors and the executive team, then bring it to the overview scrutiny committee and say, look, this is what we intend to focus on in the next 12 months.
Thank you very much, Shahid. In fact, 18 months ago or so, we did start that process. And as I said earlier, that there were some people who thought we don't have enough, and there were others who thought we have too many. But we did boil it down to what I think is a reasonable number. And I believe at the moment the executive members and the directors are continuing to work on which ones they present to us. So what you suggest will be really helpful, please. Thank you. That would be a really good idea. And then we can nail it, hopefully, once and for all.
Thank you. Yes, we'll do that.
Thank you very much. All right, then, let's just now move to item 63, which is on page 65. Climate Emergency Action Plan. We can all read, and I'm sure we've all read the report, but does Gregor want to give us a brief introduction, or shall we move directly to the officers?
Grant will be speaking on behalf tonight, Madam Chairman.
Okay, lovely. Okay, then over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this report provides an interim update on progress in delivering the Climate Emergency Action Plan, covering the last 6 months from August to January. Of course, a full annual report will be produced for consideration and then publication in July of this year. Of course, COVID continues to impact on delivery, either in terms of capacity and pace, or the wider impact on society. For example, the reductions in the use of public transport, or the greatly reduced levels of commuting within our own workforce. The longer-term implications of some of these changes, I think, was referred to by Steve a minute ago, but the long-term implications of some of these changes remain uncertain. And similarly, the policy and funding ramifications of COP26 back in November are yet to fully flow through. The report provides more detail on the Council's own emissions and outlines the intention to monitor progress on these and how we're reducing them using the local authority GHG accounting tool. The report then looks at each of the action plan's priority areas, summarising progress made along with planned activity for the next 3 months and any new actions that have been added to the plan. These priorities cover a wide area of the Council's activities under their headings transport, electric vehicles, air quality, renewable energy generation, retrofitting, carbon sequestration, engaging schools and young people, waste and recycling, new development, procurement and engagement and behaviour change. This is clearly a very wide-ranging set of priority areas. And given that wide scope, we may not be able to answer immediately lots of questions of detail. We will undertake to consult with colleagues to provide full written responses in writing following the meeting, should that be required. And then finally, the report sort of concludes with a canter through the national context and the emergent policy framework, which continues to move continuously. Thank you, Chair. That was my introduction.
Thank you. Any questions? Alison and Rachel and Sarah and Norman.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Grant. I wanted to ask you about, on page 70, what you refer to as active sockets, but I understand we'd all call them electric charging points. Is that correct? I wondered if you could tell me more about the provision of charge points on street and at council-owned car parks. How's it going to be done and how will it be paid for? And then I have got a second question as well, Chair, if that's possible.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Grant.
Grant?
Yeah, and that falls into the category, from my perspective, of not having enough information in terms of that particular area of work, but we can take that question away and come back to you with a detailed answer with transport colleagues who are working on the EV strategy.
Steve, did you want to come in there?
I can. I see, Madam Chairman. Yes, I see Greg has also joined. There was a report went to executive on vehicle charging points on street, off street, and we're looking at a pilot that's funded through government scheme. The off-street car parking points are easier to introduce because obviously the car park's already there. We own many of them, and Sainsbury's, Tesco's, all those do those sort of things anyway. So that's quite straightforward. Where it becomes more complex, admittedly, is when you put them on street, because you have to put them in the right areas, and that has to be tested. And we're currently looking at the suitability of those locations and where we would install them. I believe, and please forgive me, I think there's about 36 or something, or 30 odd or something like that we're looking at rolling out across the borough as a pilot. And the principle of being a pilot is so we learn from it. It is challenging to put on-street charging points in residential streets. I make no bones about that. Many councils have struggled with that because it takes out parking capacity potentially for those who have non-electric vehicles in those streets. So it's not as straightforward as it seems. The principle is absolutely right. The emphasis is right. The practicalities is something we have to work through. And so we will certainly test that and make sure members are fully sighted when those locations become available and where we would look to introduce them. I don't know, Gregor, if you want to add anything to that, or if you've got anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, there's just two things that I would add to what Steve says, and I would echo his point that when it comes to on-street parking EV provision, we, along like many councils, moved a lot of our street lamps Many decades ago, we put through a policy of moving street lamps back on our roads, and because we can't have cables running across pavements that could become a trip hazard, it has become slightly harder to be able to provide this. The scheme that is referenced in this, Woking Borough Council is meeting about 25% of the total bill. The other 75% is being paid for by the Government's Office of Low Emission Vehicles. We won a grant to be able to do this. In itself, it should almost double the number of publicly available electric vehicle charge points across our borough. And in order to make sure that it equally benefits our borough, at the start of last year, a piece of work was done to review electric vehicle provision across our borough. A big survey and consultation was undertaken. That created a map which shows where we have some EV charging provision and where we don't. And so with this programme going forward, one of our aims is to try and make sure that we close the gaps in terms of where we do and don't have EV provision.
Alison, is that sufficient answer, or do you want some more detail sent round in an email?
No, that was all very useful. I appreciate Gregor adding the information tonight. If I can move to my second question, thank you. Okay, so this relates to page 77. Can you give us reassurance that post the local plan update, the revised supplementary planning guidance will include stringent requirements for net zero development, maintaining planted trees, and clean energy generation?
Any comments? Or is the answer just yes?
I can come back, Madam Chairman, on that one as well. Climate elements and requirements are detailed within the National Planning Policy Framework, Councillor. So we will make sure that we are in general conformity to the requirements nationally in respect of what's required of us from a climate perspective. That's what I can give you assurance on. These questions have been asked. If we say to all builders, everything you've got to build has got to be carbon neutral, can we set policies like that? Yes, we can. At present, carbon neutral buildings are more expensive than non-carbon neutral buildings. So we've got to look at the financial envelopes of which we're working as well, because we've also got a homelessness issue. We've got other challenges out there as well, and we need to make our housing targets and attract obviously developers in to give us good growth in the borough, which is what we want to do. So I'm sure there's win-wins in all of that. I'm not saying you have to do one or you do the other. But hopefully, as things become more affordable, yes, we can do that. But I give you assurances because our local plan has to be in general conformity with the National Planning Policy Framework for it to go through examination. And then it will be, and it will pick up all the green aspects as per set out within the National Planning Policy Framework.
I'd like to just ask a little bit more about that, and not just looking forward to the new local plan, but is there any way that we can ask our officers only to grant planning consent to applications that will fit solar panels to their houses? Now, I know you're going to say that the developers therefore will not build houses, but in my experience, developers would agree to gold-plated sewers in order to build houses. So can we put some pressure on our officers, please, to insist on solar panels on any new houses?
I will certainly take that away, and I'll take any recommendations away. We obviously, when we enter into negotiations with developers, developers will turn around and ask you what you want. That's the way it works. Whether you want a school, whether you want health facilities, whether you want roads, whether you want affordable housing, whether you want social housing, whether you want social value, whatever it is. So the shopping list is there. They won't do everything.
But this is an area where developers are anxious to build.
Yeah.
We have the upper hand here and we should use it.
We do.
Okay.
Yeah, we do.
Let me move on then to Rachel.
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry, I've not finished, Alison.
Sorry, I wasn't clear about the maintaining planted trees. Is that because I think, we've got this ambition to build plant sorry, hundreds of thousands of trees. And if we're going to do that, we really need them to be maintained.
Okay. Oh, hello. Come in there.
Hello. Hi, I'm Fran Hobson. I'm actually here presenting a later report, but I just wanted to jump in on that because the report later is about the future tree strategy. As part of the tree strategy, we will be looking at how we maintain newly planted trees and existing trees as well. And we are looking at extra resource to also assist with monitoring and compliance in relation to that as well. But we can talk about that in a lot more detail on the next item, if that's okay, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Fran. Thank you. Rachel, apologies for overlooking you just now. Have you now finished, Alison? Okay, Rachel.
Thank you. And so I had questions on the transport section and also engagement section as well, if that's okay. So transport, so this is page 69. So if you look at the Climate Emergency Action Plan, the two biggest savings by far in this area are reducing the distance travelled in private vehicles and also decreasing the use of cars as a mode of transport. So they make up 88% of the planned savings. But in this report, I can't see any direct reference to anything that would have a sort of serious dent on those two sort of massive targets, and nothing planned in the next few months on those. But the report says that significant progress has been made. So the question is, when these two elements make up such a big part of the plan, why is there no direct reference to them? And how can you sort of claim that significant progress has been made on transport?
Thank you. Can somebody elucidate, please? Don't.
I think there's a challenge around transport in terms of longer term societal change and what we can do immediately to encourage some of those changes. So I think the question really is one of timescales and ability to influence over time, accepting that there aren't any quick solutions to those effectively what are big societal problems. And if we want some more specifics on the nature of the shifts around transport, then maybe we can come back with a written answer.
Anybody got a better answer?
I think it's fair to say as well, this is Rhiannon Hayes, by the way, that this is a highlight report. So it's probably showing what's occurred in the last 6 months. I think something of the size and scale of transport tends to take quite a long time to move forward. So whilst there might not be an update in this particular report, we would expect to see a more detailed account in the annual report, which is the, I suppose, the official report that we do every July and bring to council. But we can bring a written update from transport specifically. But there wasn't anything that we would necessarily put in the highlight report, I would say.
Rhiannon, is this the most up-to-date information that we have?
It is, but it's kind of I would call it just a highlight. So it's not the entire CAP, which you can appreciate. It runs to sort of probably, nearly 90 pages now. It's just a highlight of the main things that happened in the last 6 months. So it's just giving a bit of a picture of the direction that we're taking. A more substantial report comes back annually, and in that it will give you detailed information about transport. But it's just saying in this small period of time, there's nothing necessarily to report. There's no key issues to report at the moment in terms of direction. But we can give you a more comprehensive written report as a follow-up. And I'm sure that Grant, I've joined the meeting slightly late, but I'm sure Grant said that while we collate all the information, we might not necessarily have detailed information on specific areas, but we can bring that back.
Could we have a more detailed summary? I don't want all 90 odd pages, but a summary that gives us the main outlines of what's happening. Would that make you content, Rachel? Would you be happy with that?
Yeah, that would be helpful.
At the next meeting, which is not very long, is it? It's February. So could we leave that in your hands then, please, Rhiannon?
Yeah, I think this is a summary report, actually. Yeah, this is the summary report, but we can give you a written update by the next meeting, I would say.
Yes, because it is an absolutely vital plank in this platform. I thoroughly agree. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Could I also ask about engagement and behaviour change? So this is from page 75.
Yep.
There's a couple of mentions of the deliberative process here. And I just wanted to clarify a few things on how that will actually work. So in this process, to what extent will the participants actually have access to subject experts? So will they actually be able to test out all these ideas that they're discussing? Will they be able to test those out on subject experts as part of that process?
You don't?
So, so the deliberative process, which is a bit of a mouthful, so it will be called Let's Talk Climate. We are getting evidence and videos from subject experts to provide participants with background information and expertise, and then the sessions and the peer groups will be able to consider that evidence, ask questions, have those questions responded to, which is why it's a two-stage process. So they meet once, digest the evidence and the expert views and get input, have any questions or further information provided, and then they can come back with their thinking and ideas in the second session, which will be independently facilitated.
Could I just come back on that though? So there's nothing really to stop people from coming up with ideas that actually might not work or might have little impact?
In short, the answer is no, there is no way of stopping that, on the basis that even if ideas might not be unworkable, might ultimately prove unworkable, tapping into people's thoughts, ideas, and generating thinking around the topic has a value of its own. So it would be very hard to have an inclusive process that excluded anybody or excluded people who might not have full technical knowledge.
And could I also just ask about how the e-panels part of it will work? So am I right that the e-panel part basically is grading the actions that have come out of the initial phase, but actually by people who haven't seen those videos and haven't done the sort of Googling or whatever the other people will do? Is that right?
Not quite. So the e-panel part of the process, yes, it is to look at and review things that have come out of the deliberations of the peer groups and to get a wider response and a wider engagement across, the whole of Wokingham's communities. What will be made available, should those e-panel participants wish to avail themselves of it, will be the same videos and background material that they can access should they wish to inform themselves. Obviously, what we can't do is sort of force people to digest every bit of information that's available prior to putting a response back. It's really, it's really about widespread engagement, and it's partly around education and tapping into people's interests as widely as possible.
And lastly, if I may, what's to stop at the end of this whole process? What's to stop council from simply overruling what the residents have come up with as their best options?
I was just going to say, you did mention earlier there actually was would we accept all ideas that might be put forward? I think each idea will still have to be judged on its merit. You can just imagine some of the ideas that could come through. I think what we normally do on ideas is we do a viability case, we do a business case, and we look at the art of the possible. And we prioritize those that are perhaps more effective or those that we could do sooner. So there will be a few taken, if you like, on projects, but anything that's considered a really good, valuable idea, and I'm sure we'll get an awful lot of those, will be implemented.
Gregor, comments on that, please.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. So the process that has been agreed is that following the local deliberative processes response back to Woking Borough Council, the report will be brought to full council to be discussed, to be debated, and then for council to decide which one of the actions, or which ones of the actions, I should say, it wants the officers to go away and cost and carbon budget. So officers will then spend the time to work out how much it will cost to implement that plan, how much carbon we would be able to save as a result of it, and a report will then come back to full council to be again discussed, debated and decided upon. So it will be 2 votes of council, not just 1. And it will, all of the ideas will then be put into the public domain. The ones that council chooses will then be costed by the officers. It will then come back to council to then be discussed, debated and approved or rejected on that basis. So I mean, all I can say is, you know, in terms of the process, council will get 2 chances to vote and decide what it wants to discuss, and the initiatives will be taken forward and then either adopted into the CAP going forward, or there will be a reason given as to why they're not either economically viable to do, or that they're not going to save us the level of carbon that we thought for the investment that we're likely to be putting in.
So just to summarise, then council can actually pick and choose which issues they wish to take forward, and they can overrule others.
Council will be able to vote on all of the initiatives. Without knowing what those initiatives are going to be, I'm not going to be able to say categorically either way. Council will be able to push through specific ideas versus others. We need to see what those issues are going to be. We need to see what the ideas are going to be. We will then discuss them. We will debate them as a council. That is our job. And we will then make a decision as to which ones get taken forward and which ones do not get taken forward for the reasons that I've given.
I suppose, Gregor, if it's shown that it won't actually make a saving, even though it's an outsider's idea, it wouldn't be worth going ahead with it?
Yeah, I mean, if I gave you an example, so we could say we want to go. So a resident could say they want to go down the route of micronuclear within Woking Borough, for example. There's a lot of discussion. Sorry, my cat is standing in front of the light. There's a lot of discussion around micronuclear at the moment. We actually have an expert in Norman Jorgensen that's in your scrutiny committee at the moment, knows a lot about this subject. Let's say, for example, a resident comes back, the panel says, we want to go down the route of micronuclear. Council says, we want the officers to investigate it. The officers could come back and say, we've investigated it, we've spoken to the expert, it's going to cost £100 million to do. It might be able to make us completely carbon neutral in terms of our energy bill as a borough. Do we want to do it? Yes or no? £100 million investment, and council will then get to vote on whether or not we do that. Similarly, somebody might come back with an initiative around micro wind generation, which is going to cost us a sizable amount of money, but not particularly save us a huge amount of carbon. So the officers will go away, do an impartial evaluation of each one of the initiatives that is put forward by the deliberative process. It will be brought back to council, and it will then be for us, the elected representatives of our residents, to decide, do we vote in favour of doing this, whatever the cost and the carbon saving that the officers have worked up is, or do we not?
Could I just have one more comeback on that? Sorry, and then I will stop talking. Basically, I think if you did do it properly in the first place and you had those experts in the room, you wouldn't end up with unfeasible things coming through to council. We wouldn't sort of waste our time looking at them. And then also, you'd end up with residents really being informed and having, the actual decision-making power being with the residents and not being with politicians.
Any comments, Gregor?
I think Councillor Burgess makes a very interesting point. I think having access to experts is something that we intend to do. We've had experts as part of our advisory board make videos and presentations for us already. Some of them are very prominent people within the world of climate change, as we all know. I think having access to all of the information that is relevant will, as Councillor Burgess says, hopefully refine down some of the ideas that people come up with. When we did the original consultation, not long after when we launched or when we declared climate emergency, one of the first ideas that came back for helping us cut our carbon footprint was to cut the global population in half. Now that is something that is just outside of the capabilities and the sphere of influence of us as a council. Now, these are the things that actually we can immediately rule out. We know that they're things that are just outside of our sphere of influence. But that doesn't mean they won't be put into the paper for council to consider. We will tell council what all of the ideas are. They may be categorised first into these are completely infeasible. We know that already. These are the feasible ideas. But we have to go through that process, and we have to bring through all of the ideas. Because if we don't bring them in and explore them, they might not then start off the next idea or the idea after that or the idea after that that does actually make a difference. So we have to hear them all.
I don't personally think that any time spent on this is a waste of time. So however long it takes, I think we have to do it. Rhian, did you want to speak? Your face keeps flashing up.
Sorry, I think I've got a loose connection on my screen.
Okay.
So it keeps going off, so I apologise for that.
Forgive you your weak connection. Sarah.
Thank you. I firstly wanted to thank you, Rhian, Grant, Diana, for splitting out the council's organisational emissions and the geographic emissions. It does make a huge difference. So thank you for taking that on board and doing that. I have got a couple of more detailed questions about some of the things in the report, but I just wanted to ask an overarching question first. Are we on target as a geographic region to be carbon neutral by 2030?
Simple answer.
Sure. Well, I can answer that. The answer is at the moment it's no, and I think the Climate Emergency Action Plan has always made that really very, very clear, and that's part of the issue that we have to address. There is a gap, and if we are going to achieve carbon neutrality in that timeline, we will need to bring more ideas, more projects forward to do that. But it's a lot of this is about having the aspiration, and without that aspiration in place, I think, or with that aspiration in place, there's more opportunity, there's more chance of us doing more earlier on, I would say.
Okay, thank you. Just to ask a couple of specifics. So firstly, under the transport section, it says in there, one of the highlights is the London Road trial installed a 1,321 metre stretch of plastic curbing, saving just over 40,500 kilograms of carbon. Could someone enlighten me, how does putting plastic curbing in save transport emissions, please?
Is Grant the right person to answer that, or Rhian?
Definitely not.
I think that is absolutely something, unless Andrew can answer that question.
Hi, sorry,
Okay, Andrew then.
I might not be able to go into it specifically, but I remember speaking to Rob about this, and this came up from suggestion internally, I believe, anyway. I guess it's a question of categorization of where it goes in. The emissions are saved from like the pros compared to normal curbside stuff, so that's where the savings are. So obviously we would classify it as transport in that section. I don't know how else it would be classified, so that's the only issue.
So are you saying it's the savings from the manufacturing of it?
So if I just jump in on this one, actually. So the reason why it's in this section is because it was the highways team that did it. The highways team had paid for it. And as they're responsible for highways and transport, it has been reported under their section as a saving, which is why it's there. The emissions are saved because cement, which is what is typically used to make curbstones, is one of the worst polluters of any industry in the world. The amount of energy that is used in order to produce cement and in order to preform the blocks that we use compared to using recycled plastic is significantly different. Hence why we are reporting the carbon saving, from creating and using the recycled plastic curbstones rather than the cement ones.
Okay, so which section does this fall into in the plan then, if not this? Because I'm just questioning if it's actually in the scope of the plan.
It's a carbon saving that has been undertaken by the highways and transport team. It is reported in their section because it has been undertaken by them.
Yeah, but it doesn't save transport emissions, it's saving manufacturing emissions. And does that come under the scope of this? Surely that's a scope 3 emission that we're not calculating in the initial carbon budget in the first place?
I'm not 100% sure that I agree with you on that, actually. You know, this is works that are undertaken in order to maintain the roads that we have, in order to keep the transport system that we have moving, which is why by reducing the carbon footprint in terms of the production of our roads and maintaining the safety of our roads, we're claiming the carbon footprint as a result of it.
Okay, could I ask from the officers for a written response as to the methodology as to how this was calculated, please, and where this fits in? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. We'll get you that through.
Thank you. I wanted to ask as well about the retrofitting section. And I appreciate that a lot of retrofitting has taken place through the eco scheme, although not very much through the Green Home Grant local authority delivery scheme. However, the success of this appears to be measured in the number of retrofits. And given, I'm more interested in the impact that these retrofits have, because changing a light bulb is classed as a retrofit, but it does absolutely nothing to actually the efficiency of the home. So I think we really should be measuring success in terms of a change in EPC rating of a property. Are we collecting this kind of data?
I know that we do have access to that data, which is government data that's published, but that tends to be generally across the borough, so we know how many properties are in each of the categories. What we probably don't have significant information on is the ones that we've retrofitted and specific properties, but that is something that we can take away, Sarah, and have a look at and come back to you on that.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, I was going to say it's a really important measure, particularly given the government target for this. And that does lead on, are we actually going to be changing the target for this area? I know we've discussed this privately before, but I guess, you know, for the public to understand as well, the government target for retrofitting is by 2035, all homes in the country to be EPC rating C or above. Yet our own target in the Climate Emergency Action Plan is well below what it doesn't even talk about EPC ratings. Is that going to be changed?
We can certainly look at that, actually. I think, I mean, if we look at Wokingham, I think, I don't have the figures to hand, but, you know, our houses, as you'd imagine, in a relatively prosperous place, have got high EPC ratings, and we do relatively well. But I think we can reflect some of that data in and report that within the action plan going forward. So that is something we can definitely do.
Thank you. And I want to ask about the waste and recycling bit. In the report that came to full council, so the big report that we got in July, target 23 of that was to recover 80% recycling in the form of wet paper by October 2021. This update report covers that period of October 2021, but there's nothing mentioned in that. So did we achieve that target or not?
Yeah, I can say we did. Pretty sure we did that. Like I said, it's not included within this one because it was. I'm surprised it wasn't in the highlights, but in the full plan it is done as completed. Yeah.
So we did. So what percentage did we actually recover?
I couldn't give you. I can get you the exact figure. I don't know off the top of my head, but we can get you the exact figure.
Yeah, if we could have that information, please, that'd be really useful, because it's unusual that that was an actual target that hasn't been put into this highlight report.
Yeah, I think it was probably included potentially included in a previous one, so that might have been why it's been.
Could you email that to us, please, rather than wait for another meeting? That'd be useful. Thank you.
Okay.
And just one last thing. I mean, there's quite a few here, but I'll do one more now because I appreciate time. Just with the renewable energy generation, it says here the Barkham Ride Solar Farm delivery stage has started and procurement routes initially under review. So firstly, I've got a question and a request. So does this mean firstly that the Secretary of State has given the green light then? Because that's not something I've had any information on yet. And then my request is I'd like confirmation that the procurement process is going to ensure that there are no human rights abuses in it. Because currently 40% of solar PV in the UK is linked to human rights abuses of the Uyghurs in the supply chain. And I just want assurances that that isn't going to happen with Barkham Solar Farm, please.
Yeah, I think we've spoken about this before, actually, I think, Sarah, and
it's not been definitive, really. So I just want the public to know it's definitely going to happen.
This is something that sits with our colleagues in commercial property, and it's something that we'll have to follow up with them. So again, we'll speak to Ian Goff and his team, and we'll get them to get an answer back for you on that.
Has the Secretary of State given the green light? Do we know then?
I'm not aware as yet. I don't know if anybody else knows. I don't know if Gregor knows the answer to that, but we can again come back with that information for you.
Okay, it's just the report says the delivery stage has started.
I'm sorry, I don't. I was meant to have a meeting with Ian Goff earlier on today to discuss this and a number of other things in relation to the solar farm, but unfortunately he had to cancel, so I don't have an update for you.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe, Rhian, you could investigate that and again email us with the answer if that's okay.
Yes, we'll do that, yeah.
That'd be useful, thank you very much. All right, then Norman.
Okay, thank you. Just one little question on detail and then a more general point, both connected with waste, so we concentrate on waste tonight. On page 68, it's saying that the council produced approximately 157 tonnes of waste, of which 35 tonnes were recycled. You know, it's a relatively small amount, but I just wondered why we're only recycling 35 tonnes, what the remainder of the items are. And connected to that, on page 76, clearly we're saying the waste emissions are outside the initial scope. But given the volume of waste and the amount that still goes to landfill, for example, it will be a significant contributor to the emissions from the borough. So I just wonder what the plans are related to that. When we discussed in the earlier paper about the moves to reduce that, the overall amount of waste. So just what are the plans in terms of including any contributions from this in the future? Thanks.
Do you want me to do that, Rhian?
Yes, thank you.
So I think in terms of the plan for the future, I think as was mentioned earlier, the waste strategy will probably be the main plan for that. So once that comes out, that'll give you a stronger idea for where we're going with things. I think the main reason it's out of scope is because like the landfill sites and things are out of the borough, and obviously it's related to consumption emissions, which is slightly separate and again out of the scope directly. So I think and just to address your part about where the rest of it's coming from, I think a lot of it is because it includes council sites like Digital Activity Centre and stuff in the libraries and things where it's resident bins and things, and it's so it's not the council offices as such. So that's partly why. Although I have been told that from BIFA, the people, the operators, that the vast majority of that is sent for energy from waste. So that part isn't included in this report. I was told afterwards, after the report was published, but the majority goes for energy from waste. So it's not going to landfill, that remaining amount.
Okay, and the last questioner is from Jim.
Mine has already been asked and answered,
Brilliant.
so thank you.
Thank you very much. Sam, just noticed you.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a general question, really just about, I read a really interesting article today that said London tubes are currently at 50% of capacity, but the car usage is already at pre-pandemic levels or very near. Just really keen to see what sort of, if there's any sort of what the stats or if there's anything currently that how we're faring in comparison to other areas and what the plan might be to tackle this issue.
I can pick that one up, Madam Chairman, if that's all right. So it's a very good question, Councillor, and I think we need to understand where the new norm's going to land, if you like. What I can tell you is car usage, certainly if we look at our car parks and the usage of our car parks, is near enough back to where it was pre-pandemic, or certainly made major inroads. So the use of the car is one that people are choosing to use, and we need to understand the factors behind that. And bus patronage, I suppose, is the best indicator within Wokingham, and we know that has not recovered to where it needs to be, and depending who you talk to and what intelligence they have. There's a general rule of thumb that it probably won't. Under the current climate, it will probably get back to about 80% patronage of what it was pre-COVID, even when the pandemic's gone. So these are major challenges, not just for the way people are now choosing to move about from their own safety perspective, but also questions, obviously, as well, some viability issues in relation to public transport services. And you'll know very well, if you look at the London Tube has been hugely subsidised over the last 2 years by Transport for London, via DfT. And I think as we move forward and we look at how people choose to move around for their experiences over the last 2 years, I think this is going to be another significant challenge that's layered on top of what we were already dealing with. So it's an excellent question, and one that officers are looking at, but it's impossible at the moment to be purely completely accurate about where the new normal is going to land, but something that we are monitoring very, very closely.
Okay, Sam.
Thanks, Steve.
Right, well, that's the end of that item. So can I thank all of you who've participated in that questioners and answerers, and it's all ongoing work. Now, the next agenda item is item 64, which is found on page 83, the tree strategy, to consider the proposals and the time frame. And the report is really about where we are now, where we want to be, and the process involved for getting there, including the involvement of members. So let's have a look at agenda item 64, which again is a fairly robust document, which I'm sure we've all read in detail, so we don't need a big introduction, but is there anybody that wants to introduce it briefly? Yes, two people, two faces. Which of you is going first?
Hi,
Yeah,
so I'm the service manager for Green and Blue Infrastructure. We've got Laura here today, who's project managing the delivery of the tree strategy, and Laura's going to give just a brief run through of the report before we go into questions.
Yep, thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So yeah, the report notes the results from the early engagement survey, and that the purpose of that survey was to gather views from the public and stakeholders around the development of the tree strategy. So the purpose of the strategy is going to help us understand our current tree assets and provide guidance on how they're managed and how new planting schemes can be implemented to achieve maximum benefits. So the survey was published in November 21 on the engagement platform, and it was run for 22 days and directly circulated to members, town parish councils, and also publicised on the council's social media outlets and newsletters to reach the wider community. So the results provided valuable suggestions of what we should be included. To summarise, some of those key areas were looking at TPOs, developer responsibility to planting, new planting schemes, replanting policy, street tree policy, and management and maintenance of council-owned trees. So I know it was touched on earlier regarding the maintenance of newly planted trees, and this was a key area that was highlighted within the survey, so I just thought it's just worth touching on that now. So following recommendations from our ecology officers and our trees and landscape team, newly planted trees should have a young tree maintenance plan in place, and that would usually run for about 3 years. So this would consist of watering and weed maintenance, and specifically for the planting for the 250,000 trees project, this will all be agreed with the relevant land manager before planting commences to provide the best chance of the new trees being able to establish. And that will, depending on sites, that could either be taken out by volunteer or community groups, because from the survey we saw that there was a positive response for the community to be involved in these tasks, or if not, it could be taken on by our grounds maintenance contract that's already in place with particular sites, or our countryside services team, where any of those
can't be covered, we would look to include that within the supply and plant contract with whoever we engage with to actually carry out the planting on each site. But as I said, that specifically for the 250,000 tree projects, and I anticipate with newly planted trees going forward, that will all be considered as part of the maintenance and will be included within the tree strategy as well. So for the next steps, we have started gathering the responses from the survey and taking guidance from the Woodland Trust exemplar tree strategies. We'll be collating some aims and kind of objectives for the tree strategy. We've begun the tender process to engage a consultant who's going to help assist us in writing the strategy and carry out the mapping exercises, which would include the canopy cover and tree inventory. This will help us obviously assess our current tree stock and understand kind of our aims going forward. We intend to appoint a consultant at the beginning of February once expressions of interest have been reviewed. We will be looking to engage cross-party working group in early February to help steer the content of the strategy, working alongside the consultant as well at that point. And we anticipate or we're aiming to have a draft strategy ready for review in July 2022, with intending for the executive to be able to review that and approve for public consultation at their September meeting. So with that, if we can achieve all that, then we're hoping to have the draft strategy public consultation running for 4-week period in October, November 2022, and have the final strategy approved and adopted, obviously following any amendments from the draft consultation period, have the final strategy approved and adopted in January 23. So that's kind of a brief summary.
Thank you, Laura. Did you want to add anything to that, Fran?
Just briefly in relation to the maintenance of trees. So Laura touched on how we plan to maintain the trees in relation to the 250k tree planting project. But obviously on top of that, we also have the existing maintenance of our existing stock of trees, and as well as that, the maintenance of newly planted trees on development, etc. So that will be touched upon or covered within the tree strategy as well. So there will be a section within it on maintenance of existing stock, maintenance of newly planted trees, and as well as that, the maintenance of the 250k tree planting project. I would like to just add that as well as that, we have recruited recently two additional officers specifically to deal with inspection of our existing stock of trees, as well as ongoing maintenance as well. And they were recruited back in October last year. So we're in a much better position moving forward to deal with maintenance of existing stock of trees.
Thank you. I see Lindsay and Rebecca and Jim and Sarah, but can I ask a few questions first? First of all, let me say I'm glad that you've looked to the future and what trees would survive climate change, because that may well be relevant, so thank you for that. 3 questions I've got. One, if any member of the public had a suggestion as to where they could see a tree or trees being planted, including in their own garden, should they contact you, Laura? And if so, when?
Yeah, so I have got an email address set up, and that can be accessed from the Wokingham Engage platform, which is specifically for the 250,000 tree project. So yeah, if the public had any suggestions of where they would like trees planted, they can certainly send them to me, and I can liaise with the relevant land manager to obviously understand any constraints or permissions, and see if that can be incorporated as part of the 250,000 tree project, or we can obviously provide some advice as well if they're looking for that. We have currently got what's called the Garden Forest Scheme initiative set up, which is a scheme where residents can apply for a tree to be funded by us as part of the 250,000 tree project that they would plant in their own garden. So that's currently live at the moment, and we have had a good response from that from a lot of residents. And our aim is to have that scheme running throughout the project, and obviously on review, providing it's a successful scheme, then that is something that we could continue to do going forward.
So can they do that from now?
That's right, yes. So at the moment, the Garden Forest scheme is open, and that's on, they can access that at registration on the Wokingham Engage platform. Yeah.
Okay. I'd be grateful if you could email to me, if not to the others, that information so I can let people who've asked me about that know how they should contact you. Thank you. And a couple of other questions about the cross-party working group. How do you plan that should be set up? Is that up for us to decide, or who's going to initiate it?
Shall I take that one, Laura? So I think, as Laura mentioned in her briefing of the report, we plan to set that up in early February. What we intend to do is identify officers as well as members from all of the parties, and as well as that external stakeholders, including the Wokingham District Veteran Tree Association. And then we'll approach those officers and members and ask them if they'd like to be part of the cross-party working group. We're happy to take suggestions from the Overviews and Scrutiny Committee and from other groups as well as to who they think is appropriate to be on the cross-party working group.
Well, I think that's really the tail wagging the dog, if you don't mind me saying. My question really was, how are you going to identify the members that are interested? Could you perhaps email all council members and ask them if they have an interest in it? Because it's not just Scrutiny that's involved in trees. I think it's something of interest to everybody. So if you could do it that way, that would be useful.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I think we were looking to get a steer as well from the executive committee on that, and also town and parish councils. We are planning to attend the next town and parish borough liaison meeting as well, where we'll get a steer from those members as well as to who should be on the working group.
Thank you. And finally, I'm a bit dismayed that it's all going to take so long. It's going to be another year since this is adopted and put into action. Why so long? Can we speed it up?
Shall I take that one first, Laura? And then, so I think we're proposed. I mean, we've started the process of recruiting the consultant already, and we anticipate that they'll be in post by the start of February. Once we've done that, we anticipate that by June, July time, we'll have a draft report ready. Following on from that, we need to then go through to executive to get approval to then go out to consultation. And then we obviously have the consultation period as well. So I think, we have to go through those milestones, but starting in February with the consultant through to June, I don't think is a particularly long period of time to produce a tree strategy, if I may say so. There's a lot that's going to be involved in it. For example, mapping our existing stock of trees and also looking at canopy cover as well, which are significant exercises given the size of the borough. Laura, I don't know whether you had anything else to add.
Can I just pop in there and say, you do know that there's no executive meeting in August, don't you?
We'll have to look at the timing of that. I think.
So could we have a look at July rather than September? We need to get a move on with this.
Okay. I don't think that would be an issue. We can speak to Democratic Services about getting it to July.
And apologies to the rest of the committee for jumping in there, but this is something of great interest to me, as I'm sure it is to you, Lindsay.
Thank you. Just a comment, Pauline, about setting up the working group. A suggestion would be to write to the group leaders to nominate and allocate members from the relevant groups. That would be the way it's normally done. I have three questions, although one of them has at least been 2/3 answer, but I still want to ask part of it. First question I've got on page 89, it refers to £26,000 have been incorporated in the 250k tree planting project. Approximately how many trees could be planted with that 26,000?
So that 26,000 actually relates to the costs that we'll use the budget that we'll use to fund the tree strategy. So when we applied for funding for the 250k tree planting project, we realised that we also needed a tree strategy as well to not only help guide the 250k tree planting project, but also the wider management of trees across the borough. And so what we did is include within the 250k tree planting project an amount to deliver the tree strategy. So that 26,000 we anticipate using specifically to fund consultancy fees and mapping exercises associated with the tree strategy.
Okay, that's clear. Second one is regarding the maintenance and looking after the trees. And I know there's been some answers given on that. I think it's clear on trees that are in Woking Borough control. It's the issue with developers, because what we have is we will have developments where they will have planted trees within the last 2 or 3 years. And what happens to them, and what responsibility have we done with them in the past? Because if there's a lot of trees being planted and a number of them have died, what are we going to do and link in with the developer? And then those where we have new developments, is there anything being built into this will be the planning process to say that as a developer, it's your responsibility to look after them, and if you don't, then you need to replace them. So it's that straddle issue that I just want to have a bit of understanding about.
Yeah, thank you. So with regards to new developments, as you've picked up on, we have historically had issues with developers maintaining the trees, because it's vitally important within the first couple of years of the planting of the trees that they're well maintained, watered, etc., to make sure that they thrive. As you say, we have had issues with this happening in the borough. Through the planning process at the moment, the developer, if a tree doesn't survive within 5 years of planting, they are expected to come back and replant. The issue that we've had historically is that we haven't been able to monitor as much as we'd like on new development sites. However, there has been a growth bid put in for additional resource within the trees and landscape team starting next financial year, and we are looking to recruit an additional 2 officers, one of whom will be tasked with landscape compliance, and a significant part of their responsibility will be to be liaising with the planning compliance team, identifying where there are plants or trees that are dying and that need replacing, and really being proactive about getting the developers to replant where trees have died. So we do have a planning compliance team at the moment, and where possible they pick up on these issues, and then we liaise with the developers to get them to replant. But I think having that additional officer in future is crucial, because the majority of their role will be around identifying these issues. I think we're going to be in a good position moving forward in relation to that.
Okay, Lindsay.
Thank you. And my last question is, what is our policy towards veteran trees?
So that's something that we will be considering as part of the tree strategy. We work really closely with the Wokingham District Veteran Tree Association, and they will be feeding into this process significantly on how we deal with veteran trees. Wokingham District Veteran Tree Association have been a really good resource in providing us with the details of veteran trees across the borough, monitoring them, keeping a register of them, where we can then either liaise with the landowner, or where they're veteran trees on our own land, we can carry out works to do that. We have also liaised with Wokingham District Veteran Tree Association on the possibility of having tree wardens through their volunteers, actively or proactively feeding back information to the council on how we do more in relation to veteran trees. But as I say, that's something that will be covered within the tree strategy. It's an important point that was picked up by the respondents of the questionnaire as well.
Thank you. All right, Lindsay. Rebecca.
Thank you. We welcome this strategy. My comments are very similar to what Lindsay, Councillor Ferris has said, really. Unfortunately, it comes a little bit late, especially for some new developments in the area that I'm councillor for. So in Finchampstead South, in Arborfield, it's the new developers, trees have not been cared for, they've planted, they've died. not maintained. Just even trying to get developers to maintain common areas is is a big issue that we face. So we welcome this. So I think you've given a good explanation anyway about how you plan to go forward. I mean, for me, the key is using the assets that you already have. So you've got parish councils. I'm a member of the parish council as well that are very willing to get involved. We've got people that are involved with Adopt a Street. You've got lots of resources. So I think it's really important. It's more an observation than a question about how you go forward in learning from what's happened in the past, improving and making the situation better, because there's no point planting these trees if we're not going to look after them, because it is a big issue. So how do you feel you're going to work with these other local groups to really facilitate this strategy?
Thank you. I think that's a really good point. Laura, I know, is meeting with the town and parishes. Laura's already had a significant amount of engagement with the town and parishes as well on this matter, and we hope that they'll be heavily involved in the production of the tree strategy as well. So I think that's a really good point. I don't know whether you've got anything more to add, Laura, on that.
No, as you said, I've already started engaging with the town and parish councils, and we have had a really positive response. Again, it's something that's been really welcomed by them. It's something that obviously they're really keen on the council to develop, and they're really keen to have their involvement. I know most of them, if not all of them, had completed that survey, so we've already obviously got their feedback on that, and I've got direct contact with them as well. So I contact them regularly, and I'm due in February, and I've already attended one of their Clark forums. So the next one's in February, so I'll be providing updates at those as and when I'm invited, and also in between as well, attending those, so that they'll definitely be heavily involved.
Okay, thank you very much. Jim, what's your hand up?
Thank you. Firstly, are you aware that there is a cross-party working group already looking at trees and biodiversity?
Yes, so I've actually been quite heavily involved in the group. So it's the Trees and Biodiversity Task and Finish group. I think they're next on the agenda today. So yes, we were aware of that, and we have been attending some of the meetings. We've been interviewed as well about that. I think in relation to the working group that we're planning to set up, it will be specifically to look at the tree strategy, whereas I believe the Trees and Biodiversity Task and Finish group are looking at the wider elements of trees and biodiversity. So
my understanding is they've done some sterling work. I won't preempt what's coming later on, but there's a starting for your cross-party. Can we just come back to developers? Now, we've spoken about maintenance of trees or non-maintenance of trees that they've planted historically. There's also a number of examples of where they've literally just decimated areas and taken trees down, including those with TPOs. And we've gone, whoops, sorry, there's nothing we can do. So in reality, what enforcement powers have we got to make sure that they comply with these agreements? Because to date, I've not seen anything that says we have any powers.
So under the Town and Country Planning Act, a local planning authority is able to serve TPOs on trees to protect them from works or from being felled. With regards to your point in relation to trees historically having been decimated as a result of development, through the planning application process, the Trees and Landscape team comment on planning applications to ensure that we minimise any impacts on trees within the environment. And where possible, we will serve TPOs to protect them. And if a tree has to come down as a result of development, which we avoid as much as possible, we will then require the development to replant. Usually, if a development is likely to have an impact on trees, then an arboricultural statement is required, and a tree constraints plan is required as part of the planning application process. And as I say, the tree specialists are heavily involved in that. Where I think you mentioned us holding our hands up and where trees have been decimated in the past. We wouldn't, if there's been a breach of a TPO, so where someone has felled a tree that is protected without applying for a tree works application to carry out those works, we will then carry out enforcement in relation to that. Now, there are exemptions to the enforcement in relation to that, where someone who is responsible for a protected tree can fell that tree without applying for a tree works application if they are doing it to comply with a statutory piece of legislation or an act of parliament, or if they need to do it in relation to health and safety because the tree is dead or dying and it's an urgent risk to property or to life. In that instance, the council has no powers to step in and prevent that from happening. What happens is the landowner submits a notice to say that they're carrying out those works, and then they will carry out those works in relation to the exemption. So, but where someone has carried out works to a protected tree and they don't have the permission and they can't be doing it through an exemption, the council has enforcement powers to step in and enforce against that.
It would be good to understand what those enforcement powers are. I'm talking about examples of Berwick Lakes, which is health and safety. Whoops, we've chopped a few down. And south of Kpis, where we experienced over 400 trees chopped down during the nesting season. So developers are very quick and good. They're clever enough to find ways around legislation. So I come back to what enforcement powers do we have to stop this, and if we've got them, how are we going to apply them?
So just going back to the Bearwood example, with the removal of trees there, whilst it was devastating what they'd carried out, that was actually carried out under an exemption through the Town and Country Planning Act, whereby they had to comply with the Reservoirs Act to carry out works to upgrade the reservoir or the dam at the reservoir at Bearwood. So that was through an exemption. They didn't have to apply for a tree works application, and it was through the Reservoirs Act that they could carry out those works. Where enforcement comes into play, if someone does carry out works to a protected tree and they haven't obtained a tree works application, then we will interview them under caution, and then following that we can take steps to prosecute them, and it's a criminal offence in that instance.
But does that prosecution then lead to them having to replant trees?
Yes, so they will have to then replant the tree through that prosecution process.
Again, sorry, it's a difference between mature trees and planting new trees. We won't answer it now, but in the next part of this report, it would be good to see what practical and realistic enforcement opportunities we have to prevent these activities happening again. There's too many examples in working them already. We just want to make sure they do not happen again.
I totally agree, and I think that's something that we will be addressing. That will be a chapter within the tree strategy on how we deal with cases like this where there are breaches of TPOs, or not even in relation to TPOs, where people have cut down important trees and not replaced them, for example. I think there'll be a specific section on replacement planting as well. So that's what we hope that the tree strategy will help guide with.
Do you mind if I just add something slightly to that? Based on some of the exemplar tree strategies that are promoted by the Woodland Trust, and some of the consultants that obviously can write these strategies, some other local authorities have in place guidance around size or age of trees, and if they are felled, then what type of trees or how many would need to be replaced. So we can certainly speak with the consultant who will be a specialist around that, and maybe be able to provide us some guidance on how we can look at that. Just thought that was worth mentioning.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. That's a really good point.
Thank you very much, Jim. Your points are very well made, and I think we all identify with them. It's a very, very frustrating thing that happens all over the borough. Thank you for raising that. Sarah, was your hand up? Yeah.
I've always got questions. Yeah, so firstly, Yeah, I'd like to say, I think there's some really good things that have been suggested through the initial consultation. I'm really pleased to see the canopy cover aspect in there, which is obviously a much better measure of how we're doing, because obviously replacing those 450 trees at Bearwood Lakes, you're not going to replace the canopy cover unless you plant significantly more, and you lose a load of biodiversity as a result of that. So there's some specific questions I just wanted to go into. Firstly, I know this one has been talked about a bit, but I wanted to raise another aspect of it before I get into some new questions. This is about trees on developments that die. And so I was part of the Task and Finish group that looked at the adoption of a state infrastructure back in 2019, and we looked at this specific issue. And one of the main problems we found was that when obviously the developer has to get the infrastructure, the area to a certain level before the council will adopt it. But we're adopting open spaces, green spaces, areas with trees, but still giving the developer responsibility for trees long after we've adopted it, up to 5 years. And there's no incentive for them to come back and replace it if it dies or maintain it, because that's the only thing they've got to do. So I appreciate going down, you're going down the landscape compliance officer, but the recommendation at the time we made was, why don't we adopt the responsibility for maintaining the trees at the point of adopting the whole estate with the commuted sums to give us the finances to do that? Why has that not been taken on?
So I think that's a really good point. More recently, we have avoided adopting open spaces where there's issue with the trees. And so until the open space is at a point where we're happy with the landscaping, we'll avoid adoption. But obviously further down the line, there could then be issues with the trees. But if we've adopted it, then we try our best to make sure that the maintenance is carried out. A lot of tree survival relates to the weeds that collect around the tree as well. So if you've got really good weed control, then you can typically avoid as much as possible the tree dying. I think with regards to your point about taking the commuted sums to carry out maintenance, we have actually started using what we call a green bond. So what we do is similar to what highways do, where they take a bond in relation to highways, and then if there's any of the problems moving forward with that particular road, they can use the funds that they've got from the bond to carry out the works themselves rather than relying on the developer. So what we have started doing with some of the estates more recently, within the last 6 months, is collecting a green bond, which allows us to carry out the landscaping works if the developer doesn't do what's required, and that's really good because it shifts the power to us, and we then have the funds to be able to do it, rather than, as you say, relying on the developer. We're actually in a position to be able to carry out the works ourselves with the funds from the developer. Now, the issue that we have with a green bond is that it's not backed up by legislation, whereas with the highways, it's backed up through the Highways Act. That being said, if a developer is prepared to deliver on what has been proposed within the planning permission, then they should be comfortable with providing the bond, because technically if they do everything that has been agreed within the drawings, then they will get all of the bond back. We will only keep that money if they haven't done it. So, but I think that's definitely something that is helping us to be able to ensure that the landscaping on new development sites is delivered and maintained properly, and something that will again be included within the tree strategy.
Yeah, it's really good to hear, because that's pretty much what we recommended in that report. Yes. And obviously in the Section 106 agreement is where you can talk actually at that early stage about, we will be expecting a green bond, at that point. So that's good to hear. I wanted to ask quickly about, there was a thing in there about native trees or not native trees. Is any climate adaptation work going to be done? I know there's some being done as part of the local plan update, but specifically for the development of the tree strategy, because as we're seeing, we are going to see the effects of climate change, and solely planting native trees actually could be detrimental given the changes that we're going to see. So is that climate adaptation piece going to be done as part of this?
I think so, and I think that's something that we would need a steer from a specialist consultant on, you know, in terms of the types of trees that might be thriving in warmer temperatures, for example, or you know, where we're getting a significant increase in rainfall. So we'd have to take a steer from a specialist on that. I mean, we've got specialists in-house who would be able to advise on that as well, but we're definitely going to be considering that, and that was something that was highlighted through the responses that we received in the questionnaire.
No, that's good to hear. Thank you. And I want to just pick up on just once this strategy is in place, it's actually about it being implemented. I know that sounds like a silly thing to say, but the current tree policy talks about all council-owned woodland to have woodland management plans. And after battling for about 2 years, we finally now got one for Fox Hill Woodland, and it's been credit to a couple of your colleagues on doing that. But that wasn't being done as standard, despite the fact it was in our policy. I shouldn't be having to battle for that and get the community to battle. So, you know, is this going to sit on the shelf and gather dust, or is this actually, you know, what assurances do we have this is going to happen?
Yeah, I think the first point to mention is that historically the responsibility for trees sat across the council. So there were various different teams who had responsibility. So for example, the operational tree management sat within localities, the strategic side of trees and our responsibilities under the Town and Country Planning Act sat within delivery and infrastructure, and then the maintenance for trees, for example, in schools sat within, you know, children's services. So I think the first thing that was really important for us to do is to make sure that that overall management and coordination of tree responsibilities all sits within one team, and that is now the case. It all sits within the green and blue infrastructure team, so operational side and strategic side sits together. And I think that's really important because now that all of the specialists who manage tree related matters can coordinate things much better. I think on top of that, it's really important for us to be making sure that this isn't a strategy, as you say, that just sits on the shelf. And I think the way that we can do that is through having an action plan within the tree strategy. So what we're proposing is that an appendix of the strategy will include an action plan, and there will be time frames where we have to achieve the various different actions, and then what we plan to do is it's not been decided yet, but I anticipate that we'll be reviewing the strategy on probably, you know, every other year to make sure that we're achieving the actions, and I suspect it will come back to overview and scrutiny for discussion as well. But I think that action plan is going to be key in making sure that the strategy doesn't just sit on the shelf and we are carrying out the actions proposed within the strategy.
No, that's really good to hear. May I suggest then maybe that the working group that's being set up to develop the strategy continues, doesn't get disbanded afterwards, and continues to ensure the action plan is done. That'd be good. There's just one other very quick thing. It's just with regards to the time frame of all this. There isn't mention of this committee getting the draft strategy before it goes to executive, and it does need to come to us first. Whether it goes to executive in July or September, whichever month it is, can we have it with enough time that we can meaningfully contribute to it and not like a week before?
Yeah, I don't see that as being an issue. I think that's fine.
Thank you.
I'm just looking to see when we have a meeting, February and March.
We always have one in June, and I think we have one in July, don't we, Neil? And then the next one's September. So if it goes to exec in September, we could get it in July. I don't know, because we've obviously got summer holidays is the issue, but...
June or July then. Aim for June. And if it goes to July, well, we'll accept that.
And even if it's not completed, the draft strategy, we don't mind a work in progress because it allows us to input.
That's fine. Yeah, we're happy to do that.
Thank you. Lovely. Well, the recommendation on page 83 says that we note the results of the tree strategy early engagement survey and consider the timeline and milestones for the emerging tree strategy. I would like to add a sentence or a phrase to that last point, so that it reads tree strategy, comma, with the request that the timeline be shortened if possible. Now, would I have a seconder to that? Thank you. So can I see those who would be in favour of adding with the request that the timeline be shortened if possible I see those in favour. Well, thank you. That's really great. Thank you. And I know you'll do your best on that. And thank you both very much, Laura and Fran, for coming tonight and for all the work you're doing on this. Again, it's something of really great importance to all of us. So thanks for that.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll do our best to try and get it done as quickly as possible.
Thank you. So now then we move to the task and finish group. And it's really just an update on where it's got to. And I think Neil's got a bit of information to give us. Right, Neil?
Yep. So as you said, Chairman, it's just a brief report giving an update on the task and finish group. It has been meeting. It agreed some terms of reference, which is set out on page 92. And as you'll be aware, the council then asked it to consider the other issue on a possible ecological emergency motion, which has been added into its work programme. So a number of witnesses have attended, including Fran and Laura, who you've just spoken to, Townsend Parish Council, the Veteran Tree Association, and we've got more meetings coming up, and we're looking to get more witnesses involved, and hopefully a report back here in February or March with recommendations for consideration. And in the meantime, if any members want to submit evidence or comments to the task and finish group, that will be welcome, I'm sure.
That's great. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, I just had 2 points. Firstly, on the terms of reference, was it terms of reference? Yeah. One of them, it says to consider examples of best practice in tree protection and biodiversity from across the country. Given that the UK is in the worst 10% of the world on nature intactness, I'm wondering why we're limiting looking at best practice to this country when clearly our country isn't very good when it comes to best practice. And could we not look a little bit further afield to countries that are actually much better at this?
For example?
Well, there's lots of them with the worst 10%.
Yes, true.
Yes, we can take that back to the group.
Thank you. And the other thing I wanted to mention, actually, I'd made a note of this, and actually Ian Shenton, who is the proposer of the ecological emergency motion, has since been in touch with me. I know he's been contacted to come forward. I also wondered, will you be getting maybe someone from an organisation like BBOUT to come along? So when we wrote the ecological emergency motion, we actually discussed this with the policymakers at BBOUT to understand what's going on and to get some really good grounding for it. And actually having someone from an organisation like that would be invaluable to making that decision as to what to do.
Okay.
Yes, we can take that back.
Thank you. I can put you in touch with people if you like.
That'd be great. Thank you, Sarah. And we are asked to say whether we've got any additional issues that we'd like the task and finish group to address. Otherwise, just leave them to get on as they're doing. Jim?
I'm not sure if it's proper to this task or finish group, but as we've just mentioned, the how to enforce strategies, I think if they've got capacity to do that, I think that would be good to find best practice.
Yeah. Can that be minuted, Neil, and taken back to the group? That's vitally important. Is there anything else? Your chance now to feed into it. But please take Neil at his word, and if there's anything you want to say to the task and finish group or any evidence you want to give, please get in touch with Neil and do that, because you know its brief is very specific, and if anybody's got any experience, then please give it to them. Otherwise, the recommendation is to consider the progress made, which we've done, and consider any additional issues, which we have also done. So are you happy that recommendation stands? Alison?
Sorry, can I just ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
So the task and finish are aiming to send their report to us in February or March. And then, of course, we send it up to executive to consider. I just wondered how the task and finish report fitted in with the timeline for the tree strategy, because the two things do tie together quite closely, don't they?
Neil?
So as I mentioned, we have been meeting with Fran and Laura, so we will make sure that the two things are coordinated. So I think the Task and Finish Group's report will be making recommendations relating to the tree strategy, and they will be fed into that process.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, lovely. Okay, are you agreed to the recommendation then? Anybody against? Let's put it that way. Okay, lovely, thank you. And now then, agenda item 66, which is on page 97, the work programmes. And this is really about the process for developing next year's work programme, which we've looked at every year. And as far as I can see, it's the same as we've done every year. So unless you've got any further suggestions to make, I'm quite happy that we do it in this way again. Anyone with any comments? Alison?
I'm not quite sure if it fits in, but I just wondered if we could, with the work programme, we also need to look very closely at the calendar, because I think we've all found on various committees that sometimes the committee date in relationship to full council or to executive just doesn't really work.
That's true. We normally have the calendar at the annual council, don't we? I wonder if it's possible that we could have a draft here.
Well, it's about this time of year that I know Democratic Services are trying to put it together.
Yes.
But I just think something needs to change, because we've had a lot of problems. You know, I think we're all aware that sometimes we have those weeks where we seem to have an ONS on the Monday and on the Tuesday, and we're talking about something really crucial to do with the executive or the full council coming up really soon. So if we can just
I wonder, is it
work on
possible
it
for us to have a draft calendar to the next meeting? I know there's a lot of work involved, but Alison's quite right, and sometimes the executive meeting has already happened before the scrutiny meeting.
I think that the calendar goes to the January council meeting, so that's probably going to happen very shortly, Chairman. So that might be difficult, but I will take back the concerns raised.
Yes, well, I think if that is the case, then what we have to do at the January council is vote it down.
Well, if that is the case, then I think the calendar should always come to OS management to look at before it's going to full council.
I agree, and this is a case.
Can I propose that as a motion, please?
Yes. Give us some precise wording then, please.
The draft calendar of council meetings, it should come for consideration by ONS management. Is that enough?
Before going to full council?
Yes.
Yeah.
I hope I've got a cross-party seconder.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you very much, sir.
Brilliant. Did you get that down, Neil? And as from when, I presume we can't do that till next year, unless we can postpone it coming to full council.
I'll take it back.
Take it back then, please, Neil, and please take back the strength of our feeling, because it has been so frustrating that we haven't had time to discuss things. Jim.
Thank you, Chair. Try and get this up. I know this is sort of related, but it's how do we remind council of the fact that overview scrutiny should be doing pre-decision scrutiny, and how do we get to that position? I know the calendar is part of that process, but we need to have a gentle reminder to turn around and say that it's no good telling us to scrutinise things after they've been decided. So I'm not sure how we do that, but.
Neither am I. Neil, any suggestions?
As I mentioned in the report on the work programmes, the one thing that's changed this year is the LGA peer review report, which I think is due to come out shortly. And one of the issues addressed in that is, I think, around their feedback on how effective scrutiny is. So that might be the vehicle for this committee and the other committees to actually get that debate going.
As always, thanks, Neil.
We've got a motion that's been proposed by Alison that the draft comes to this committee before going to council. Could I add an amendment, Alison, to say if possible this year as well? Is that all right with the seconders? Okay, so Neil, would you like to read out the whole of the proposal now then, please?
So it's the annual council calendar to consider the overall street management for the before joint full council starting this year, if possible.
Brilliant.
Can't guarantee it will be possible.
I leave it in your capable hands, Neil, with every confidence. May I see those in favour of that motion then, please? That's great. Thank you very much. That was unanimous. Super. And the recommendations, presumably you're, as well as that agenda amendment, you're happy with them? Okay. Right, Jim, you just voting or do you want to say something?
No, we voted. It's just that, again, that covers the agenda, the programme.
Yeah.
I still think as a committee, we should put a gentle reminder out to say that where at all possible, we should have pre-scrutiny opportunities, not post-scrutiny opportunities. Do you want me to put that forward as a motion? Or is that something we can just do as a committee, just to put a gentle reminder out?
Shall we start with a gentle reminder? And then if that doesn't work, we'll come in a bit harder. Thank you.
I was just going to say, Paul, we have actually made some progress in this regard with the waste strategy and the tree strategy. I think it's just, we've got to keep hammering it home.
Yeah, we have got to be persistent. I think we are. Thank you. Executive Forward Programme, any comments on that? Right.
Sorry,
Sarah.
The corporate peer challenge report and action plan, should this actually be coming to scrutiny? If scrutiny itself is one of the things that's been highlighted, should we be having a look at it and discussing it?
Which one is that?
If I can find it now, it's just my notes here.
Page 107, Chairman, the
Thank
extraordinary executive for the 7th of March.
Thank you. I just think that if there's a lot about the effectiveness of scrutiny, we should be taking a look at that and having a discussion about it and understanding what we can do in line with the recommendations.
Well, I didn't think there was an awful lot about scrutiny in it compared with the overall report.
Okay, I've not seen it, but we're being told that it does include a bit about scrutiny.
A couple of sentences, as far as I know. Neil?
As I'm putting the work programme report, that the peer review report will highlight what they think are the strengths and weaknesses. So that may well give some ideas for inclusion in the work programme. And we could also touch on their feedback on scrutiny as well. So I think it would be a good idea to come here in some form.
Thanks, Neil.
Okay, moving on then to the individual executive member forward plan, page 111. Right, and our own management committee, page 114. We need to include the tree strategy update, don't we? And the task and finish group, when is that coming to us?
February or March?
Is that in the March one? I can't see it.
Not on there at the moment.
Right, but it'll come in one or other of those. What about the tree strategy update then? June, July? Oh, it doesn't go that far. Okay. Children's Services, Norman, you happy with that?
Yes, at the meeting yesterday evening, we identified another 5 or 6 topics to take away and review how we covered them, whether they can be included in any of the work items or whether we need additional work items. So we'll, unfortunately, I forgot to bring the list with me, but there's about another half a dozen. So we'll look at those and see how they fit in the programme.
Okay, could you email them to Neil then, please? Could you email those topics and suggest which months they might go in?
Yeah, I've got a meeting planned with the new Director of Children's Services just to go through that.
Super.
Lucy Ann will liaise with Neil on that.
There's no rush.
Yeah. And we've assumed that we have the same sort of meeting schedule. So we've actually scheduled things right through to the end of the year.
Right. Okay, thank you. Corporate and community, Guy, are you happy with that programme?
Yes, we had our meeting finalising the budget last week, so we've got our final bits and bobs to go through for the rest of the year. So yeah, I'm content with it.
Thank you. And Alison, health overview and scrutiny, are you content with that?
It might look a bit light on the January agenda at the moment, and that's because we were asked by Charles Moggetts and Matt Pope to take off some things because clearly most of the officers in adult services are incredibly busy, you know, with the COVID, all the issues with that. And since the purpose of our committee is to only add value, we respected that. So we do have an unscheduled list that's growing. I need to talk to Madeline about see if we could add something else into February, which we've put on a February meeting, which is additional. Because there are quite a few things from the Berkshire Health Foundation Trust and Royal Berkshire Hospital that have been causing us concern.
Do you want to enumerate them so they can go into the February meeting, or is that not?
No, I think that the meetings that we've got items on tend to be officers from outside the council. Although I wouldn't be too surprised if perhaps you know, the growing pressures on the health services might mean there's issues with them presenting as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, the action tracker is getting longer now. Something I was going to bring up. Oh, the September one. Find it. Yeah, yeah, the council motions. I know Neil, you've been under a lot of pressure and it couldn't come to today's meeting, but what is the hold up on the council motions? I'm not looking for excuses. I'm just genuinely saying what are the reasons why it's being delayed?
I think I'm the hold up, Chairman. So at the moment, we're focusing on the task and finish group and its report. Once that's finished, we'll be then to focus on other things, including that.
Right. So it'll be with us in February or March. March. But as from next year, in November. Yeah. I'll hold you to that promise. Sarah.
Thanks. That was one of my questions I was going to ask. The other thing is it does say that details of motions are supposed to be on the council website. I had a look and I couldn't find them. Have they been done yet? Okay, any idea when that's going to be done?
I'm going to roll it all together into the March thing. So that's my time frame.
No worries. Thank you. And just one other quick thing. Have these regular meetings with CLT and the executive started happening yet?
No, I have not been invited to any, and I keep asking Neil why.
So following the last discussion, I emailed the chief executive and reminded her that this was agreed that this should happen as part of the protocol. And I haven't yet managed to tie down any dates. So maybe you, Chairman, might want to write to the chief executive to remind her about this, to give it some autumn.
Yeah, okay, because we do raise it at every meeting, don't we? Yeah. I'll do that.
Might be a good idea to maybe get several in the calendar in advance, the way this is going.
Right, lovely. Now, I've just got one other item, which is urgent. It's a very short one. We've had trouble trying to find a date when we can hold this extra meeting about the call-in. And the date that we've now come down for is February the 8th. Is there anybody that couldn't make February the 8th?
I haven't got my diary with me, so I don't know.
Say 7:30, because I know there is a meeting earlier.
I'm afraid I've got a town council, full council that night.
Okay.
What day of the week is that, please?
It's Tuesday.
Tuesday.
I'm most likely not going to be able to physically attend as I am currently scheduled to be in Manchester for 3 days that week.
Okay. Well, that's two people. The
Yes,
rest
I have a meeting that night as well.
Right. It should be possible, I think, to find 3 substitutes.
Yeah, we are allowed to have substitutes, aren't we?
Sorry?
Substitutes are permitted for calling.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Substitutes.
Yeah, substitutes are permitted per call in. I was at a funeral for one call in a year or so back, so I definitely couldn't attend that one. And
We can't
I think it was, I can't remember who subbed for me, but yes, it is possible.
You can have substitutes, yeah. Okay, I think we'll have to fix on that date because there isn't any other that works. And we'll just have to find substitutes for those who are engaged elsewhere. I mean, there's more people who can make that date than any of the others anyway. So shall we fix on that then?
Well, it wasn't actually discussed. I don't even know if I can do it. Could it not be done that maybe a doodle poll sent round to all committee members with, that might get a better idea, because not everyone's here tonight either.
No, that's true.
So maybe a doodle poll, because it sounds like quite a lot of people can't come out. I've not been consulted on that date before, so.
No, well, it's only just emerged. So perhaps Neil, you could ask everybody on the.
Thank you. I think before we set on that date, we need to understand, because there's also those Friday dates you suggested as well.
Yeah, most people couldn't make those dates either. But it's just that it's dragging on. I mean, I don't mind when we hold it, but we do need to settle on a date that people can be here for. Anyway, I'll leave that to Neil to contact people and ask. And given that that date might work, can you pencil it into your diaries if you are free? And those that can't do it, we'll find some substitutes.
Is that within, sorry, Pauline, is that within the timescales? Lindsay's just said that there's a timescale for a call, and I have no idea what it is, but.
I think it just about is, isn't it, Neil?
It's not within the timescale, but there's an exception if the chairman agrees that there are exceptional circumstances. And in this case, we've tried for every night, but there are always other meetings or other commitments. So that is causing the problem, and that's why we need to look a bit further ahead.
Yeah, I did see some emails offering Fridays. And
Yes. It's only what about less than 2 weeks beyond the original cut-off date. I am anxious to get on with it as fast as possible. Okay, well, thank you ever so much, all of you, for attending tonight with your contributions. I now declare the meeting closed.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Colin.
Thank you, Neil.